My name is Eric Chiquillo. I am a staff engineer at Reddit, and today I'm going to be giving a talk about debugging in remote environments on mobile. My talk is called Debugging in the Wild, Unleashing the Power of Remote Tooling. Okay, so first I'm going to cover some basics on local testing before you release to production, and then I will give 3 case studies about applying these tips and tricks that I'm going to give through my talk on how I applied them to solve 3 issues, one around JSON migration, one fixing a crash, and the last one was integrating with Chrome custom tabs. And then finally, I'll talk about what's next for us at Reddit. So cool. First, local testing. So I believe that effective testing is layered. So each layer of testing gives you more confidence that what you ship to production will work. So the first one is developer testing. I believe you should compile your code and test it yourself. Make sure that things are working because you were the developer, so you are most familiar with the ins and outs and edge cases. And so you should verify that those things are working. In addition, you should have some unit tests. Either write them now, but if you practice TDD, which is test-driven development, those tests would already be there. Unit tests are effective for testing edge cases, preventing regressions, and they're very quick, and you can add a bunch of them for all kinds of both happy paths and also things that when things could go on, like edge cases, I guess. Finally, next screenshot testing. What I mean by screenshot testing is snapshot-based, where there's a golden screenshot, where when you develop the feature, you take the screenshot, and then whenever something changes on that screenshot, it would create, when anything changes on that screen, the new screenshot would show that difference, and you either accept that difference or not. It's also effective to include these screenshots in your PRs so that the person reviewing your code sees what that screen actually looks like. It just gives them more context. So it's like you get a win-win on that one. Next, you should have some end-to-end testing, which is, you can use Express or whatever framework you want, but this ensures that from one end of it ensures integration is working. So unit tests are verifying that the code is working in isolation, screenshots are verifying that visually it looks correct, and then end-to-end is making sure that it all hooks up together. And then finally, you should have team playtests. And what I mean by team playtest is have your team take your build and dog food it. You were the developer, but we're human, so we have our own biases and things that we forgot about. And I've been to playtests where people tested my stuff in ways I didn't even think about. And they were able to find issues before I released the production. I was very grateful. So you should leverage your team. And so I am saying test your code before shipping it, but there's also this law in economics of the law of diminishing returns, which is eventually as you put more energy into it, your return for that is not going to be as high. Most of us work for-profit companies, so our time is valuable. So we could continue testing and testing and testing, but at some point you're testing edge cases or things that users might run into, but your time is more valuable doing something else. But where that point of maximum yield is varies. So for example, in my first company, I worked for a games company, and if I shipped a bug to production, it wasn't great, but hopefully it only made an inconvenience to their day. Maybe they couldn't play a move, or they couldn't send a chat. It wasn't the end of the day, it was just a minor inconvenience. On the other end of the spectrum, I worked for a Bluetooth company where we had Bluetooth hardware, and if I were to ship bad code and potentially ruin the communication between the phone and that device, I basically turned that device into a paperweight, which would be very detrimental to the company. We were a small startup, and if your device is inoperable, we would have to ship you a new device. Devices are not free, so that would be a very costly mistake and potentially bankrupt our company. So we were a lot more careful on anything that would touch Bluetooth, than I was at my first job. But for your company, you just have to decide, based on your risk tolerance, how much testing you're going to do. And I'll spend the remainder of the slide, or my deck, talking about ways where I thought it was working locally, but it actually didn't, and then give tips and tricks on how to debug this stuff remotely. So first, JSON to Moshi. So we wanted to migrate off JSON, which is a library that uses reflection to convert JSON into a Java object. Reflection is slow, so we thought moving over to Moshi, which uses code generation, would improve performance in the app. In addition, it helped our migration at Reddit. We're now 100% Kotlin, but at the time we weren't there yet, but this was like another step towards it. So how I did it was I needed to replace all versions of Moshi, or JSON. Mostly it was a one-to-one mapping. There was some syntactic changes, but not too bad. And then I needed to convert all the custom adapters. And what a custom adapter is if it's not a one-to-one mapping, maybe you have to do some extra validation, or you have to combine multiple JSON keys into your Kotlin object. That's when you would write a custom adapter. So some of my testing that I did, I checked each of these custom adapters, checked each custom adapter by going to that screen. I verified that the screen worked, that things were still operable, making sure that all that worked. So I did some developer testing there. I wrote my unit tests, so I would take a JSON blob from our server response or from shared preferences, and then run that string through the converter and make sure that it gave me the right Kotlin file or Kotlin object. I tested upgrade paths. What upgrade path is you install the old version, which was using JSON, log in, do a couple things, and then upgrade to the latest version, which has a Moshi instead of JSON, and verify that things were working properly. When I initially was doing this in my first runs, I was catching a lot of issues because we were saving things to shared preferences, and then Moshi didn't like something, or I forgot a key or something, and then it broke. So I did fix a couple issues that way. And then finally, I did some third-party QA. I asked our third-party QA to verify that things were working as intended as well. So I released it, and unfortunately, it did crash on me. It was complaining about, if you look at the stack trace, it's talking about something, it has Moshi in it, and it's talking about I forgot add ID, which leads me to my first tool, which is a common stack trace. Most of us are familiar with it, but what a stack trace is it's the call history of what was running when this crash happened, and there's many clues in there. But in order to get these clues, you need to make sure that you upload your mapping file, which is my first tip when using a stack trace. And what a mapping file is on the right. I took this off the Google, developer.google.com. So when you run R8, it will obfuscate your code, and so it will turn Android X app compat action bar drawer into a.a.a.b, and there's a couple other ones. So if you don't upload your mapping file, your stack trace is not going to be very helpful. There's going to be a bunch of letters and numbers, which isn't very effective. I mean, you hopefully still have the mapping file so you can figure it out, but it just would take a lot longer. So if you're not uploading it, I recommend you start uploading it. Next, when you're looking at that stack trace, some different clues that you should look for. At Reddit, we have a large Android developer team, and so what's on develop compared to what's in the release could be a little bit different. The line numbers might not match up. So if you check out the release version of the code, you'll have an easier time following, like the line numbers in your stack trace will match up perfectly with what's in the code. Next, I would recommend starting with the code that you're most familiar with. Try not to look, most likely it's something, if it's the bug I assigned to you, it's most likely something that you wrote, so just, you'll be a lot quicker if you're looking at code that you're familiar with. Next, look for the nested exceptions. So if you're using coroutine might swallow the real exception, so just kind of look around where it crashed and look at the other code around and see if there's like another runtime exception or something else that could have gone wrong, because it could be masking that real crash. And then finally, if it's a new crash in this release, I recommend looking at all the PRs that went between the last release and the current release, just to limit the blast radius that you have to look at. And hopefully you can find the bug a lot quicker. And so in my case, the issue was I didn't do enough real user testing. And what I mean by that is that I did test upgrade paths, but when I was testing upgrade paths, I was only verifying that when you log in, that when I installed the new version, it would work as intended. But if you remember to the slide where I had the crash, it was complaining that it could not find add ID. And the issue was in the top right, you'll see that I have this data class, last add click info. And in that version of the app, I forgot to include this keep class, which is in our ProGuard file, to make sure that it kept that file. And so when it got saved to shared preferences, it was saving it as A, B, C, where A was add ID, B was timestamp, and C was the page where the click occurred. But when I did Moshi to do the code generation, it was looking for the word add ID instead of A. And when it didn't find it, it crashed. But I was easily able to find this crash and issue a hotfix. So once I found this, I fixed it and I released it. If you want more info on how I did it, I did write a blog post a couple years ago, so I won't go into it this time. But yeah, so I fixed this crash and then I moved on to our next case study, which was preventing a different crash. So we had this concurrent modification exception in the Reddit app. So at the bottom right, you'll see that it's talking about a linked list and how there's a null object and it couldn't find it, and so we got a null pointer exception. If you Google this string, you'll probably find something talking about concurrent modification exception, and how it happens is that something will, there's a list that you're iterating through, and while you're iterating through this list, something else modifies the list, so the next method doesn't work, and now you have a null there, and then it crashes. And so the reason this was happening was because we were assuming in this code block, or in this code file, that everything was happening on the main thread. But that wasn't actually true anymore. We had done a recent refactor where we introduced a job scheduler, and the job scheduler runs on a background thread. So both the background thread and the main thread were touching the same list, causing this crash that we saw. So the plan was to move all computation onto a background thread, not just the job scheduler stuff. And I also took the time to migrate the code from Rx to coroutines. So when I joined Reddit, we had a lot of Rx code, and we still have a little bit, but we are moving over to natively supported coroutines. And I have a code snippet at the top. I still wanted to make everything single-threaded like the main thread because the code did assume things were single-threaded, but we didn't need to do all this work on the main thread because most of it was fire and forget logic. It would just send some signal to this class, but it never actually returned anything. So it was also a performance win to move everything to a background thread. So at the top, I use an executor to make the single thread, and then off that single-threaded executor, I make a coroutine so that I didn't have to deal with mutexes and whatnot and maintain the integrity that the code was already assuming. But I knew there were some risks involved because threading is risky. I've had a lot of bugs related to threading. It's kind of hard to keep everything in your head. And so I used my A/B testing framework with the dependency injection to leave the original code untouched. And how I did that was I had an interface, and depending on whether you were in control or treatment, I would contribute the correct class to the dagger graph. And so that allowed me, if something were to go wrong, to easily switch it off because the original code that we had in production for many years is still there. It still had that other crash, but I just wanted to be able to make sure I don't make things worse. And then second, I rigorously tested it. I unit tested it. I did some end-to-end tests, and I did a lot of play tests. And then I released it, and unfortunately, it didn't work. It did crash, but I got a new crash. Albeit not as bad of a crash as the first one, but it still was a crash. But if you look at the stack trace, it is mentioning a transaction. So there was a little bit of a clue. We use room, and then it was talking about a transaction. So I used those two keywords to Google around, and I did find this commit on the room open source project talking about that it's recommended that all functions on the coroutine use the suspend keyword. Otherwise, you have a deadlock, which sounded a lot like the issue that I had. And so at the bottom, you'll see, I used to have just this function that was deleting. Because it was running on a single-threaded executor on the background, I was just synchronously calling this code. But I added the word suspend. And if you look at the decompiled version of the red line compared to the green line, Room actually generates a lot of coroutine code if you add the word suspend. So I was very hopeful that this was actually going to work and fix my crash, but it did not, which leads me to my next tool, which is utilizing breadcrumbs. And so what a breadcrumb is that it allows you on Crashlytics to add additional log statements that get collected as the user session continues. So you can log things like that the user entered somewhere or that this code path executed. And when the crash or the non-fatal or the ANR happens, it'll all get uploaded so that you both have the stack trace on that tab, but if you click over to the logs and breadcrumb tab, it'll have all that info that you included. You can include stuff to help you debug stuff. But when you're including things, my tip number 3 is to have a way to remotely turn off this logging. Because this logging is not free. You are sending bytes from your user's device to your network. And you're also, depending on how you store this data, you could be generating a lot and overwhelming your system and kind of wasting system money because you have logs that you might not look at. So once you have the signal that you need, you should turn off the log both for performance reasons and also for cost savings if needed. In addition, don't include PII, which is privately identifiable information in your logs. It might violate your team or your company's privacy policy. What I mean by PII is like don't include like their IP address or anything that identifies this user, because you don't want that stuff on someone else's server. Depending on where your logs go, it could be a legal risk. But then, so I added these breadcrumbs, and I had a facepalm moment where I saw something that said begin delete, which starts a transaction, and then I saw that it was making another database call to get the unsubmitted, and then it would end the transaction. So I thought maybe Room does not like that while I'm in a transaction, I'm making more database calls to it, and maybe that's why it's locking. And so to address this, and why it was a facepalm moment is because it was a single thread executor, so I thought everything was running linearly, but it is coroutine, so it's suspending. So what it was doing actually was it was beginning the transaction and throwing off control. It was suspending on my thread and throwing it off to a coroutine thread or a Room transaction thread. And because my thread is free, when the app would ask to get, it would allow that to go through, and then I thought that was an issue. And so how I addressed it was I added my own locking. So I added a mutex, and I just added this with lock, so any interaction with the database would actually go through my mutex. And hopefully I thought that would work. It did not. So that leads me to tip number 4. Before I added a bunch more breadcrumbs, which is to add a common prefix so you can linearly see them. So in the screenshot for this particular issue, I added a lot of, my prefix was add analytics. And so this allows me to linearly see all my breadcrumbs in order. Because at Reddit, I'm not the only person using breadcrumbs. So if I didn't do this, it's all there, but you'll also have other info in there in between my, what the logs I cared about and the other one. And seeing everything together, I was able to actually, it ultimately helped me find the actual issue. So I continued to add breadcrumbs. I added breadcrumbs when the job scheduler started and stopped, when the user swapped, when the app opened and closed, and a bunch of other ones. And eventually I had my breakthrough moment. I had an aha. I saw my begin save unsubmitted, and then I saw this database closing, and suspiciously I never saw the end save. Okay, cool, we're back. But yeah, so I wasn't seeing the end save. And so this gave me a clue, like maybe something is going wrong around the database closing. So I wanted to validate this theory. So I wrote code like this, where I made a function called take a really long time transaction, and it would start the save, and then I added that delay of 5 seconds just to give me time as a human to hit an artificial button that would close our database. And successfully, I was able to get the exact DB locked exception that I was seeing in production. And so I had a path forward because I knew, okay, it's when a transaction, mid-transaction, the database is closing, that's what's causing this crash. And so the actual issue why users were seeing it was because at Reddit at the time, we were using per user databases. And so each user had their own database file so that we could keep everything together and join things together. But when you swap the user, we would close that database before opening a database for the next user. At Reddit, we allow you to have multiple accounts, and we make it really easy to save this on your phone, and from the right side menu, you can just easily swap. And so what users were doing, they were timing it perfectly. They were able to just use the app, and then unfortunate for us, they would swap it right when they were in a transaction, and that would crash. And so it's a room sharp edge. This issue didn't exist when we were using RX, but when we moved over to coroutines, if you're in a transaction, just check when you're closing the database, because you could lock it, and then the next database action will actually crash your app. And yeah, so what was the solution? The solution was actually to utilize Room's auto close feature. So instead of us manually calling close database, Room allows you to turn on a flag to tell it after X seconds, once it thinks it's in a good state, have it close itself. And I also decided to do this with using a per feature database. So I moved my code out of the main database that we had in the Reddit into my own feature modules database, just to limit the blast radius, because I didn't want to make this change for everyone. I wanted it to only apply for my feature for now until I was able to GA it. And so using that, those two solutions together, using auto closing and then moving it to my per feature one, because I didn't need to join on any other Reddit data for my issue, I was able to actually solve it. And this leads me to my last case study, which is integrating Chrome custom tab service. And so I thought it was a gift. So this is a snippet from the Google website on the Chrome custom tab, where it's talking about if you call the function warmup and may launch, you could potentially load a web page up to 700 milliseconds faster, which just reduces lag for our users. In this case, I work on ads, and so when a user clicks an ad, it's going to open the advertiser's website, and so we want that to be the best experience possible. We don't want to show a loading screen if we can avoid it, and so I thought by just calling these two methods, which we already were using Chrome custom tabs, we were just using a stateless way, we could get this win. But to get this win, I needed to measure this speed up. And so Room allows you to register a custom callback, to register this function to get a callback to on navigation event, which has an enum called navigation event, which could be either the tab opening, tab closed, browser started loading the web page, and browser successfully loaded the web page. And so I made an analytic event in Reddit, a Reddit analytic event from the moment the user clicked until I got the callback telling me that the web page successfully loaded. And I wanted to compare this event, the browser load event, control versus my experiment, just to see how much of a win we were getting and if it moved any metrics. So I released it, and unfortunately, this analytic event I added was missing. So we actually didn't know if he was doing any better or not, but that was a problem because I wanted that event, and so I had no crash though. So what do? Everything was working for me locally. I was getting this event, and I could add breadcrumbs, but Crashalytics needs a crash or an ANR or a non-fatal in order to see these breadcrumbs. But in my case, everything was working to the user, it's just I wasn't getting my log event. So I looked around for prior art. I looked to see if anyone else had run into the issue where the callback was not executing when they were expecting it to. I did not see anything, so I needed to find a way to get more info. And like I said before, because I didn't have a crash, how do I get my breadcrumbs? And my solution for this, which is tip number 5, is to make your own trigger event. In my case, I used a custom non-fatal. I called it fallback web browser non-fatal, it doesn't really matter. But make sure, like before, add it behind a flag so you can turn it off. Because this is even worse, or not worse, but it's like it is definitely sending something to Crashlytics when it executes, and you don't want to overload your Crashlytics metrics. It's a pet peeve of mine when people leave non-fatals into the code base, because when you have a real one in there, it gets hidden in all the noise. So trying to minimize how many non-fatals you have is helpful, just for overall app health. But my next tip is to use breadcrumbs and not add info to the crash message. So don't do what I'm doing there, where is throw a runtime exception, including the URL in the error message, but instead make it a breadcrumb. And the reason is Crashlytics tries to group error messages together, but if you were to add the URL to it, you would have a bunch of unique crashes, and you just have pages and pages, and it wouldn't do a very good job. And in the old days, Reddit actually had an issue where we had way too many crashes. It's okay to have 1,000,000 of one crash, but having 1,000,000 unique crashes, Crashlytics didn't like it very much. So use breadcrumbs, don't add that info into your error message. But yeah, so now I had a way to get my breadcrumbs back from a user's device, and now I need to decide what should I log. One theory I had was maybe if I moved it from browser finished loading to browser started loading, maybe it was a web page issue, maybe a JavaScript issue. It's very unlikely because we released it to production, so there's many websites being loaded, and it's unlikely that all web pages had this issue, because I was seeing 0. But it was a theory I wanted to try. So like I said, with the on navigation event, you can change which, it's just a number, so you can change on which one you fire on. So I wanted to try that. I also wanted to know, is it airing out too early? And so to do this, I added breadcrumbs along the call chain to make sure that each thing was executing, and if it wasn't, I could see through the breadcrumbs that, this where I was expecting something to be there, it's not there. I also wanted to know maybe calling warmup is affecting it. So on the sample, they asked you to call warmup, and then you create the session. I wanted to know, well, what if I don't call warmup? Will I start getting this event? I wanted to know, does the thread I'm communicating with the service matter? Do I have to do it on the main thread, or can I do it on a background thread? And then finally, does timing matter? Does the length of time between when I registered the callback and the click actually happening and the web page loading, does that matter? So this is just a summary of the 5 questions that I went through. I won't go through them again, but I just wanted to put them all on one slide. But then the issue is that I'm on mobile, and I'm very grateful that Reddit releases weekly, but to test those 5 questions individually would take me over 5 weeks. And the reason being is that I release it, I can get signal, but by the time I get signal, it might be too close to code freeze, so I can't actually react to that signal. And so it could take me up to 10 weeks, like maybe 2 weeks per theory, and that would be just too slow. And that leads me to my last tip, which is to repurpose your A/B testing framework to test your theories instead. So most people use A/B testing frameworks to compare each variant to control, where like maybe if you move the button from the left side to the right side or change the color of the button, you want to compare performance of that compared to what control performance is. I'm saying temporarily pause that and make an experiment just to test your theories. So you can selectively turn on and off each theory, and you can make different combinations to see what will work. And doing that, I can release it in one release, which is just 1 week, and not have to worry about the release cycle, and just validate my theories a little bit quicker and to get my solution. I included like what I was doing on the right, just like a sample. I included some of the PR just so that reviewers can know what each of these ominous names meant. And yeah, so what actually did matter in the end was giving the most time between starting the session and the URL opening. It kind of makes sense. Some state needed to be registered. Maybe I was triggering a race condition, and by the time the URL opened, it wasn't hitting the callback wasn't registered in time, and so it wasn't sending me back the data. But then I just modified the code so I would register a little bit earlier, and then I started getting it. So we were able to measure the speed up. And so as a recap, I started the talk with tests based on your company's priorities and what your risk tolerance is. You should definitely do some local testing before going to production. But if something does slip through the cracks, I gave 3 case studies. The first one was there was a crash with an easy to reproduce issue. I looked at the stack trace, issued a hotfix, and then everything was good. The second one was a crash, but I wasn't really sure how to use it. And so for that one, because I had the crash, I would recommend adding some breadcrumbs, but have a way to turn off those breadcrumbs. And then finally, an issue in production, but it wasn't a crashing issue. And so for that one, you want to make your own trigger event. And then it would apply to all the scenarios, but if you had multiple theories that you wanted to test, I'd recommend repurposing your A/B testing framework. So what's next for us at Reddit? So we're going to try, we're looking for ways of not using the A/B testing framework to get these log data back. There's no issue using the A/B testing framework, but we're trying to see if there's other tooling or things or ways to get that info back so that we can effectively debug more issues in the future. And yeah, that's the end of my talk. Thank you.